Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and if I sound a little bit more excited than usual for today's episode, it's because I am so excited about today's guest. Her name is Kristen Dickey. We've already been talking before we hit record today, and I think we've already had enough substantial conversation that it would blow people's minds to listen in on the higher level business stuff that we got to talk about. Kristen is not only brilliant, but she's passionate. She's so good at what she does. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Kristen before I actually bring her on the air. Kristen is a marketing and advertising sales professional turned corporate refugee. I love that term turned solopreneur. She spent 15 years working for major media corporations, including NBC Universal, Warner Media, Viacom, Weather Channel, Shazam, Vivo, and The Trade Desk. Now she's leveraging all of that experience to help her clients improve their marketing strategy, website experience, and branding, but under her own umbrella. And I love her company name. I want to know the backstory to it. Her company is called Media Humanity, where she helps small and medium-sized businesses with so much of the stuff inside the marketing mix. I'm not going to say anything else about Kristen because I want to dive straight into my interview with Kristen Dickey. Kristen, what's going on today? You heard your bio. Welcome to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Oh, thank you, Brian. Thank you for the very generous bio. It's always weird hearing nice things about yourself. Feels very oh. That's just, the imposter.
I feel you on that, but fill in the gaps. Obviously, that's a little bit about your bio. I already got some fun facts about you and perhaps some family connections, but I want you to fill in the gaps for listeners. Who is Kristen?
So, wow. Kristen, that's a complex question. In terms of my career trajectory, Kristen is a girl from California who moved to Florida just to get her, foot in the door of the media ad sales world. I moved to Orlando, Florida to work for the Golf Channel right after graduating college. This is 2009-ish. Was there for a couple years and then ended up transferring to the NBC Sports sales office in Los Angeles, where I was born and just wanted to come back to California. So I stayed with the NBC Sports Group for, in total, about 4.5 years. I wanted to stay within sports media, so I ended up going to Turner Sports. From there, went to Viacom. From there, I pretty much just went from sports to music, but stayed in the media ad sales world. Shazam, Vivo, and then most recently The Trade Desk. And it only took 15 years of being in corporate media marketing and advertising to realize that I think that corporate life just ain't for me. And to your point about my family, my dad was a co-founder of DoubleClick, kind of a OG of the open internet back in the early 90s. And I think the apple definitely does not fall far from the tree in terms of I've never been the best foot soldier without understanding the whys. I ask a lot of questions. I kind of really need to understand the sausage making of things, if you will. So being a cog in the corporate machine, was something that never felt quite right, but it took me a long time to actually action on it and become, the solopreneur that I am now.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because you talk about wanting to go out under your own umbrella, but you're right, that number, 15 years. And that's why I love that term you put in your bio of corporate refugee. Kristen, what took so long? What did those 15 years feel like? But most importantly, the part of your story that I'm eager to hear about is what gave you that push after 15 years?
Yeah, so a decade and a half is a pretty long time. I would say that, it wasn't that I felt like I needed just a little more experience, a little more depth of understanding, or let me just close a few more clients or prove that I can do this or that. I think it really comes from just being raised by parents who deeply cared about my security and my well-being. And the best way that they knew how to do that was to encourage me in ways that, helped prompted my growth, yes, but not at the idea of sacrificing security of income, the steady paycheck. My dad is a little more entrepreneurially spirited. He's been part of several, startup business ventures. And frankly, I'm pretty sure my mom has PTSD from supporting those dreams for so long. And some worked out and some didn't. But I think that I stuck in that corporate world for such a long time for that reason. It was just, this is what you do. This is how you, identify yourself. And I think I kind of got stuck in this whole idea of like confirmation bias. There's this concept. I love Adam Grant. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he talks about identity foreclosure. And it's basically when you settle prematurely on some sort of sense of self of who you are, and then you close your mind off to alternatives. So I got too comfortable, not happy, just comfortable, complacent. And it just took me a long time to actually get that push out of it. So to your point of what pushed me, and let me preface this by saying, I feel that in general, it's better to feel pulled towards something you want versus pushed away from something you don't want. But sometimes it takes being pushed to force you into that space where you can be pulled. So I felt pushed in terms of having a lot of, micromanagers, middle managers, corporate structures I didn't understand, team goals that were not always communicated. And for me, being on the sales side, it's a grind and it is not for everyone. And as much as you love the kill and, closing the revenue and closing the new business, I really wanted to fewer clients because I'm pre-sale. So it's like you hit your numbers, you close your new business, and you hand that client off to the client services team or the coordinator, the account manager, and you don't know how they end up doing, how they end up faring, within your world. And okay, did running that homepage takeover do anything for them? Did buying that commercial spot in an NFL game get them the, audience and viewership and, KPIs that they wanted? And I hated not, knowing what happened on the other end. So that kind of pushed me more towards the realm of marketing and being pulled, by the creative side that I didn't get to leverage as much. I was very much in the number crunching world and the goal hitting world. I was just like, I feel like I'm a very creative person. I feel like I write well. I also design things well. These are like passions. And I think, if you listen to that intuitive voice in your head, you kind of know the things that you get in your flow state doing. I would get lost doing PowerPoint decks for like 2 hours and then pull myself out of it and be like, whoa, this is not my job. I'm supposed to be, an ad salesperson, yet I went in here and spent 2 hours changing everything my marketing manager did because it feels like a very generic off-the-shelf deck that I want to change before I send out the door to my client. But I would like, what happened? I blacked out. And then come to and be like, oh, wait, I probably should have used that last 2 hours doing, outbound lead gen.
Yeah, and obviously that's something that I totally understand, having been in the game for as long as I have, is that as an entrepreneur, it is all of these things, but they do fall all on us, which means that we get to do it in our own way. And that's why I feel like your answer just there, talking about the analytical side, talking about the different hats that you maybe shouldn't have needed to wear, but within the corporate world, you already dropped the word PowerPoints, and I'm just like, oh, is there any corporate word more corporate-y than PowerPoints? Yeah. So I feel like that's a good segue because I want to understand really the backstory to your brand, because I'll tell you what, when our team saw the way that your company shows up in the world, in addition to you personally, it really stood out. Media humanity. And you talk about humanizing marketing, which is a drastically different world of spending, $5 million on a 30-second Super Bowl ad, and here's all the metrics that came as a result of it. Talk to us about media humanity. Give us that backstory.
Yeah. So, Media Humanity, first off, I actually bought that domain name back in 2020. And that was when I was in between jobs. Obviously, this was, maybe 6 months into the pandemic. I stopped working at Vivo around October of 2020 and then started at the trade desk about 6 months later in April of 2021, I believe. So basically during that time, I already kind of felt myself wanting to do my own thing, but just didn't quite have the gall to take the plunge. At that point. So, I was thinking about my career path in media, and essentially anything that happens in a digital scope is media. All the content, all the storytelling that happens across the open internet, it's all media. And so I think a big part of, marketing and humanizing yourself is telling your story through the channel, through the, conduit of media, letting people kind of become aware of your, product or service, through, the buying and selling of media. And it sounds transactional, but it all comes down to the creative and the copy and kind of how you present yourself to the world and what your unique value proposition is, your competitive differentiators. That doesn't have to be a bunch of like corporate jargon BS. It's like when I came to the trade desk, they were kind of starting to hire more people like me that had a traditional TV ad sales background. And, I think you're probably familiar with this, but TV and digital are two different sets of corporate acronyms. They're two different bowls of alphabet soup of acronyms. So it's like in TV, you're talking GRPs and TRPs and CPPs, and over here in programmatic digital media, you're talking about APIs and, DMPs and SSPs and DSPs. And it's like, these don't cross over. And Trade Desk was, very smartly, starting to make CTV a priority. So, obviously, where's the low-hanging fruit for that? It's going to traditional TV buyers and getting into those rooms and speaking that language. So I almost felt like I was brought on board as a translator, like demystify, destigmatize, whatever, programmatic, because there was an overarching idea that, it's automated. It's kind of similar to AI now. It's going to take over our jobs. It's going to make our agency obsolete. Why would I all of a sudden shift my dollars to running media this way versus the way I've been doing it, publisher direct, for 30 plus years? So that's kind of where Media Humanity came from, is just, anything that happens in the digital universe is media, whether it's content, stories, or advertising. And humanity is really just what it sounds like, which is just sound like yourself. And I don't think you have to sacrifice your authority or your expertise with your product or service in order to, you can sound human and convey authority at the same time. And I feel like some companies think that those two things are mutually exclusive, and Media Humanity is just saying they're not.
Yeah, it's fun for me to hear you talk about Media Humanity with regards to, you already mentioned some of the more strategic and tactical side of marketing, such as your copy, the messaging that you use, but also I do like that you bring it back to the human element. And obviously I have the advantage of knowing from your guest questionnaire and from doing some research about you, about your obsession with behavioral psychology. I'm super curious because obviously off air, you and I were talking about things like showing your value proposition before you actually share people with your price. It's such a common mistake that newer entrepreneurs make, which is they say, hey, here's what my prices are. Do you want to work with me? Whereas obviously from a behavioral perspective, first we have to make people want things. We have to really speak to people's limbic system, the emotional side of why we want things and why we make decisions. I'm curious for you to go deeper into that, and specifically, how does your obsession with that behavioral psychology factor into the way that you approach these projects?
Yeah, I mean, that obsession is truly just like a switch that can't be turned off. That's the lens through which I view pretty much everything. And when it really helps me is, I have clients who are kind of just all over the place. Like I have not niched down yet into, I help fitness or health professionals, or I help, Airbnb hosts. Like I have an Airbnb host client. I have a retail technology client. I have a, high level, luxury travel consulting business client. It's all over the map. So I think my strength is being able to basically take off my marketing hat, put on my human behavioral psychology hat, look at their websites objectively and be like, would the average person understand this? Would they see that, oh yeah, this is for me. I did land on the right website or in the right place. And I think that honestly, like, I don't know if you've ever listened to this podcast called Nudge. It's a marketing podcast that I really, really like. And it's all about the behavioral psychology behind those things. But I'm also, as you said, a huge proponent of, behavioral psychologists like Adam Grant, who we talked about before. I love Brene Brown and Simon Sinek and actually Jay Shetty, who comes at behavioral psychology from more of a spiritual perspective. He has a podcast called On Purpose. And Really, it's just the fact that like these are mutually exclusive things. Understanding how the human brain tends to work is imperative in understanding how to execute effective marketing. You know, if, like you just said, if you lead with the price, you are closing a door before it's even open yet. You don't even give yourself a chance to explain your unique value proposition, how you can help them. You know, you don't give the chance to yourself the chance to sell, you know, what you can do for them before you say, oh, and here's my price. And obviously, it's human nature to want to find that. And not in a deceitful way, but you need to make sure you give yourself a chance to first explain your value and what you can do for them before you drop that price tag. And as we were talking about before we started recording, you know, this is, you know, you have to like charge a certain amount because you're not ad supported. And that makes complete logical sense. It's like, let me create a great user experience and listening experience without ads. But you know, you're humans too. You're a business. You have to make money. Where does that money come from? From, you know, charging for by appearance. And that makes perfect sense. So I think being upfront about those things, but not leading with it.
Yeah, I love
so
that.
Imperative.
Sorry, Kristen. If I jump in, it's just because of the connection going funky in a little bit. But
no worries.
I love that overview. And obviously, I love the way that you tie it into the podcast, because it's something that we so often experience with our guests. And that's why we are so grateful for our guests to help us make this show possible. But one thing that listeners really love about the experience, you talked about it being ad-free, but another thing that they absolutely love is how frequently I pick on what entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs frequently do that they shouldn't be doing in their businesses. And that's why I feel like all this stuff you're talking about right now, this is the perfect segue for you, Kristen, to also pick on our listeners just a little bit. Talk to us about some of those things from a human element, from that psychology element. What are some of those other mistakes that you see people making? And I'm thinking within the realm of marketing, within the realm of sales. You've been on so many different sides of the business coin. I want you to expose with a big old shining light so listeners feel it personally as they're hearing this. What are some of those big mistakes that you see business owners and entrepreneurs making?
Yeah, I mean, I love that question, because I think what's really amazing is to just expose the mistakes so that you can correct them. It's like if we bury stuff under the rug, then like it's never going to get fixed. So I think a couple of the biggest problems that I see on a recurring basis, especially in terms of, you know, somebody's digital footprint, their storefront, their website, is heroing themselves, not their customer. So, you know, you might be, you know, on the top 10 or 20 list of Forbes top whatever, or, you know, insert obscure, you know, digital publication, you know, top 50, whatever. And maybe that's credibility to people, or maybe you think it is, but it's very Janet Jackson. Okay, but what have you done for me lately? And if you hero yourself in the story and not the customer, you know, you're really doing yourself a disservice, because frankly, nobody cares what you can do until they know what you can do for them. And I know that's been said a million times, but it's because it's true. So that's a big mistake that I see made very often. Another one is the language that people use, kind of reverting back to what I was saying about being hired as almost a language translator between TV and digital advertising at the trade desk. You know, I think a lot of people, because it's so first nature and they've been speaking maybe the digital, or, you know, there was the programmatic ad tech language for such a long time, it was just totally autopilot. But then if you go into a room and you talk to, you know, TV buyers who have never heard those acronyms, and maybe they're very high level and don't want to admit in front of like their direct reports, like, I don't know what an API is. You know, it's better to just say all the words and try to steer away from the industry jargon, because pretty soon AI is going to be able to generate all of that. So you need to really figure out how to distinguish yourself. You know, if you type into, you know, ChatGPT or whatever, like value prop for, you know, CRM tech company, it's going to spit out the same thing for you as it is for the person across the world who typed in the same question. And we're going to have a whole bunch of carbon copies happening across the digital universe. So you better have something unique and interesting to say about the value that your business brings to people's lives.
Yeah, the thing that I really like about your answer there is that you talked about us speaking about our own value that we bring, not leveraging those external resources. And it's fun for me to hear you talk about this in particular because you come from a media world. You come from that world of working in broadcast television that we've all seen. And it's funny, when I go to your website, I'm on your website right now, mediahumanity.com, which we'll talk about at the end. But I like that I see and hear you in it. I don't see all of these logos as seen in Fox, CNN, NBC, all these other things. I get to hear what you actually do. And it's very clear what you do. It's right on the top. Copywriting, web design, brand marketing. Turn strangers into loyal customers by building bonds based on shared humanity. And Kristen, I'm going to shout you out for something that I don't think I've seen on I want to say many, but maybe not even any other businesses' websites, which is you actually, for your customers and your prospective customers, you point them in the direction of external resources that you think will benefit them. If people go onto your website and click resources, there's a whole section, content recommendations. Here's what you think would benefit your ideal customers, just deepening that bond. I want you to speak because I know our listeners are those entrepreneurs who are trying to make it. You know, they're trying to hit their first 10K a month. They're trying to grow beyond 10K a month to multiple six figures, and they feel those external resources. We are all operating in a world where everybody else, our competitors, all have those as seen in logos. They're all paying to be featured in these top 10 lists. I just got pitched from LA Weekly in my personal inbox the other day, and they were like, hey, pay us $7,500 and we'll run you as the front story for our featured entrepreneur for 2023. And yeah, and that's the world that so many entrepreneurs feel like they have to compete in. But Kristen, you're not competing in that way. I want you to talk a little bit about how you show up with value, because clearly you really have found the way to do that. And I know a lot of it is going to go with stuff you've already talked about, being human, being seen, leading with your value, but share those insights, because when you're putting this strategy together for Airbnb hosts, for all the other types of clients you're working with, it is exactly that. The name of the game is the same. Show the value that you can give to others. Talk to us about how we sit down and identify that and get over those imposter syndromes that we face and other things that hold us back from believing.
Yeah, thank you so much for actually in real time going to my site and seeing the resources page and everything. So I think that what's really important is let's be real for a second. Your website is obviously going to be rife with ulterior motive. You are selling your product or service. You are selling your ability to help people solve a problem that they have, provide them a service or a product that alleviates a pain point in their life. Obviously, they go there, they expect that. But what they don't often expect is to be directed to other places and other resources that can also help them. And I know you also have a background in SEO. It's not just a good SEO play on the back end to have external links, but beyond that, it's okay, if this is something that, I find interesting and helpful as an entrepreneur, solopreneur myself, I would bet money that other people in the same position as me would find that helpful too. And, I made mistakes early on of going to people for help who did not have the experience in the thing that I'm trying to do. It's very important in the beginning when you're kind of a solopreneur and figuring it all out on the job. You're going to need help, but you have to ask the right people, the right resources or mentor or whatever it is for the help that you need. And it has to be people who have already walked the path that you're trying to walk. So that's kind of my way of just, this is free. This is just help. This is just, okay, this helps me, and I'm sure it might help you too. And frankly, I think that in providing value before asking for a value exchange is a great way to build rapport. It's a great way to start to build trust and, help them with foundational strategies. So that's why I put stuff like that on there. I'm also just full of unsolicited advice, and I just can't get through a conversation without mentioning a podcast I listened to or read. And, if you go through my last 20 texts to people, there's probably a podcast link within the first 3 scrolls of that conversation. So again, it's just like a flip I can't turn off.
I love that. And of course, I do love podcast junkies. So that's music to my ears. But Kristen, it leads me to something, because as I listen to you talk about the way that you do business, so much of it, obviously, your company name leads with it, so much of it comes back to understanding humans. Now, you are blessed with the natural obsession of behavioral psychology, but I will be transparent with you in that a lot of my podcast listeners, when I host office hours, when I get emails from listeners, one common thread that I see is a lot of people question, well, how do I speak to them in their language? How do I get to know them on their level? Do I have to run surveys? Do I have to, the old school way, when I was in business school, I remember they always used to talk about paying for focus groups. I've never actually met someone who pays for focus groups. But Kristen, how do you get inside of their heads? I know everybody has a different way. I'm of the belief that if you just go on Reddit, like you're obsessed with podcasts, I'm obsessed with Reddit. Everyone talks about everything on Reddit. You can get inside real conversations. But talk to us about your approach. Yes.
Yeah, honestly, like it's very similar to yours, which is there is so much information like readily available across the open internet. So, find passive ways like Reddit threads, subreddits, like go to Facebook groups of like, okay, say I'm a real estate agent. Go into like, say I'm located in Charleston and I'm a new real estate agent. I need to find people, in the market to buy a house. So maybe you find groups that are like newbies in Charleston, things that are relevant. Find Facebook groups, become passive viewers and see what happens on those threads, what types of questions people ask, what kind of struggles people are having. There is so much readily available information out there to get your questions answered without you having to even directly consult anybody or run focus groups or whatever, because a lot of times that only works. I see people do like LinkedIn polls and things like that. And if you have a huge following, then maybe you'll get, a large enough sample size for it to be relevant and for it to be, so where I'm looking for, extractable, and, you can kind of attribute it like correlation, causation, but that's not most people, especially not new business owners. When you're just trying to understand your customer, you ask if you actually have people in your life who, would be your target customer. Sure. Ask them, what's the worst that could happen? You're not soliciting their business. You're asking them about the pain points they have and, how do they typically look to solve that? And you come from the SEO world too. So I'll go into Keyword Planner and just start typing in questions like, okay, if I needed help with my new business and marketing, what question would I type into Google to get the answer that my business is the answer for? So just take advantage of the wealth of opportunity that there is across the open internet to get your own questions answered.
Yeah, and those are actions that every business owner must take. It's those simple research steps that are going to make such a big difference in your marketing. Kristen, I love that you revealed Google Keyword Planner, because you're right, that is a free tool. The thing I love about Google Keyword Planner and Reddit is that they're both anonymous, whereas you talk about, for example, polling data. We see in the political scene that polls are often inaccurate because people don't want to reveal their own true inner feelings, whereas Reddit...
Or the only people that answer those polls are people who skew one way or the other, and it's just not a good, reflection.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the same is true. Like the type of person who publicly airs all their stuff in a Facebook group, that's one specific type of person. But the rest of the people who want to be anonymous, they are pouring their hearts out in Reddit anonymously, or Google Keyword Research Planner. That doesn't even have any humans attached to it. It is raw data. So I love those insights right there.
Yeah. And honestly, I love that you're familiar with Keyword Planner because you do SEO also. So obviously you understand Keyword Planner. But yeah, it's just like there's a lot of anonymity out there that you can take advantage of. But, even in those, I think of like the Yelp experience where a lot of times people only leave reviews if they're disgruntled. A lot of times, like when we have a positive experience, we say nothing. We only say something if we had a poor experience or we want to vent our frustrations or whatever. So you have to be just like cognizant of the context, cognizant of the platform that you're on, what it's typically used for, and use each one for its own unique strength. Use Reddit because it's anonymous. Use Keyword Planner because it's anonymous. Use those Facebook groups because you're trying to get research about specific relevant target audiences for you. So just use each resource for what its strength is.
Yeah, and I'm gonna publicly admit this, Kristen. I don't think I've ever shared this strategy. I could probably do a Strategy Wednesday episode about this. But speaking of Facebook groups, for example, we're talking about humanizing marketing, and that's something that you specialize in. One strategy that I've always used since the beginning of Facebook is when I find my ideal customers, whether it's from a Facebook group or anywhere else, I will click through to their personal profile and I will stalk everything I can see. What are their page likes? Where are their check-ins? I want to see all of the things that they are engaging with. Facebook is a treasure trove of data for all of us. So yeah, you're right. When it's not anonymous, take advantage of it. Google those people. See what associations they're in. See where they're traveling, what conferences they're going to. Those are all things that enable you to humanize your marketing. I love those insights, Kristen.
Why you're good at what you do, because like you actually take the time to see like what are the other touch points for that person, like what other groups are they part of. If it's publicly available information, then the world is your oyster. Like you can do whatever you want until like third-party cookies deprecate and we're not able to retarget and track around the internet with IP. Then it's like, okay, as long as this is still the state of things, then take advantage of it while it lasts. And understanding somebody's interests, behaviors online, what they search, where they live, like these are all things that it's just free research to help you improve your marketing, your site experience. There's just no limit to like the type of research you can do. But I will say that something that I have definitely been guilty of is the analysis paralysis, the perfectionism that like I go probably like investigative journalist level down the rabbit hole of research sometimes, and it can be a huge time suck. So just being able to understand, like, I'm willing to give exactly this much time to research today. This is how much time I have. If I can't complete everything I need here, then I'll block off some more time later in the week. And just like recognizing your own tendencies, because I can really go down the rabbit hole in those situations.
Trust me, as someone who is also obsessive like you are, I totally get the rabbit holes. Kristen, I think you and I could talk all day long about marketing, about business growth, but before I let you go, I do have a few more questions for you. This is teetering on the edge of the longer episodes, but I know listeners are going to be enjoying these conversations. I want to ask you this. Here's the thing, Kristen, this is a different question than I ask most guests, because you know, as well as listeners do, that I don't have any pre-planned questions. I don't have any canned questions. Every conversation is different. But before we hit record today, there was one question that I was like, I'm going to put Kristen on the spot and I'm going to ask her this today. Because when I look up what your company does, one of the things that you say is, beyond a business's what, I help effectively communicate their how, why, and who in a way that resonates on an emotional level, converts with real results, and conveys both their industry authority and personal passion for their product. Now, here's the thing, Kristen. When I'm hosting this show, to me, it just means that I'm one of the listeners that actually happens to just get to ask questions. And I always have my listener hat on. And with my listener hat on, I always think about branding agencies and marketing agencies and marketers. And they always talk about the who, what, how, why, when. That's always the things that we throw around. But my question, if I'm a newer entrepreneur, my question is, why do I care about that, Kristen? Why can't I just tell people how I help them? Why does my why need to factor into my branding and my business? Why does my how need to? Why does my who need to? Why do all of these things matter? I'm just trying to convince people that they should buy my services. What's your answer there?
Yeah, and I think you definitely lead with your, how I help the business. Like we said before, you hero your potential customer, not yourself, in your story and across your site. But why it's important for them to also convey, who they are, what got them started doing this business in the first place, and their why. They're like Simon Sinek's start with why. That's really important because it's a differentiator. And because in humanizing yourself, you basically give yourself opportunities to find common threads with people, who are in your target audience. So, say, you're in Florida and, I don't know if this is true or not, but like maybe you're a Bucks fan or maybe you're a Dolphins fan. Just these like small things that you don't know if it could be a common thread until you put it out there. So maybe you really struggled in the corporate world, like I did. And it's just these kind of like threads of empathy, threads of understanding and shared experience that you give yourself an opportunity to have in telling somebody like, this is my why. And I worked with, I'll give an example. So I actually redesigned a site for a municipal court judge who ended up starting her own law practice. She's an amazing woman. But her why, her about page was just like a list of her creds, which is a long and prestigious list, prestigious law school, this award, this law award, this, that, the other. And it was very impressive, but didn't really tell me anything about like, okay, so, why'd you get into law in the first place? And even if somebody isn't going into law, the relatable thread is she moved from one city to another, during the pandemic, which I'm sure a lot of people have, myself included, but it's really just the thread of, let me try something new. Let me take a bet on myself. She started her own practice. That's something that as an entrepreneur, you and I both know is a very hard thing to do, to push yourself over that line and take that leap. Those are shared threads. So even if it's not law specifically, there are commonalities there. And there are kind of just those foundational rapport types of elements that you can forge without even having to have a direct conversation with somebody. You put it on your website, you put it out there, let other people say, oh my God, really? Me too. Like I did the same thing. And, again, it's not mutually exclusive to share who you are, share your why. For her family and prioritizing, her son, she was like, I was at soccer games and I was on my phone and, 24/7. And at that point, my husband said, like, this has to change. We need to be present. We're not always going to have, a young son, and this is an important time. So, just recognizing those shared threads of humanity and commonality, I think, are why you want to give a little more information than you might feel comfortable giving. And say really quick that I actually walk every client through something called brand foundations. It's an exercise that I do with everybody to kind of figure out, your why. And when I did that with her, I mean, it was like a teary conversation. It was like an unintentional therapy session of just like, oh my God. And she said at the end, she was like, wow, this is really invigorating me. This is reminding me, of my why. We get so bogged down in the day-to-day weeds and we get so on autopilot that sometimes we forget. And we have to remember that like motivation will waver. It will definitely waver. It's perishable. So you take advantage of it in the beginning when it's strong so that you like act on it, you create a habit off of it. And then later when motivation dwindles, you've already created that habit. But yeah, I think that's why it's really important to share those other elements of your experience.
Boom, Kristen, that is such a powerful answer. All of you listeners, go back and listen to that because you have no idea, for so many of you who are not operating this way, you have no idea how powerful this is. I remember in my early 20s when I was running my marketing and SEO agency, I thought I needed the best sales tactics, the best marketing strategies to start winning clients and winning sales. But as Kristen just revealed, you wouldn't believe the number of times that someone did business with me because we both were Celtics fans or we went to the same college. Those types of human threads, those human connections, those are often the reasons why people make those purchasing decisions. So if you're not showing up as you, if you're not flaunting, hey, here's who I am and why I work the way that I do and why I do what I do, you're robbing yourself of those connections. You're robbing your potential customers of the opportunity to work with someone that they really enjoy. Kristen, as soon as you came on air today, we established our commonalities so quickly. You're from LA. We both live on the East Coast. In the South now, we both are avid travelers. We're both clearly marketing and personal development junkies. All of these things build that rapport. So all of you listeners, go back, do this. Check out the way that Kristen shows up in the world because it's evident in everything that she does. So Kristen, I love that answer that you just gave us.
Thank you so much. And I think it's hard to be objective about ourselves. I'll add that as just a last thing. I think we tend to minimize our own story or think like, I don't have a story. But you do. And I think that, it's hard to be objective about ourselves, but the more that we can kind of step back and recognize how far we've come up until this point. And okay, my career trajectory has been, mostly corporate and only now delving in. But, like you said before, 15 years of doing something and you discovered very early on, I think you said you were only 24 when you like launched your own first company. And, here I am, I launched mine at the ripe age of 36, and now I'm 37. And I think it's just having self-compassion. And I'm really into mindfulness and meditation. And I think that is so hard for all of us to really take that lesson and action on it. But self-compassion, especially in the entrepreneurial journey, is absolutely imperative, because you're not going to know how to do the vast majority of things that are required off the bat. Your zone of genius is your zone of genius for a reason. You're not supposed to know. I know marketing, marketing, but when I launched that LLC, I didn't know how to even create an invoice or a service agreement or legal and financial stuff. That I used to just go to the company intranet and pull down that document that I need that legal made. It's like figuring out those hurdles on the job. It's hard, but if you have compassion for yourself and understand, I'm not supposed to know how to do that yet. I've never done it. And just recognizing that and not letting it be the thing that stops you, just seeing it as oh, this is a new skill set I'm going to learn. Or if I have enough capital to outsource it and have somebody help me with it, cool. I know a lot of new business owners don't, but if you do, great. And then, like we said before, Google, great resource.
Yeah, Kristen, it's so much fun for me having this conversation with you today and hearing the way that you think, because to me, it shows that there's no coincidence how dedicated you are to your own personal growth. That's why you have the business growth that you have. So listeners, I encourage you, go back, listen to these answers that Kristen is sharing with you today, because success leaves clues. This is her showing you the way that she operates, the way that she thinks, and that's why not only she grows personally, but also her business grows professionally. So, Kristen, I love these insights here today. I've so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I want to give you the stage, though. Tell listeners where they should go to learn more about Media Humanity, where they should go to learn more about you and follow you, and all the awesome resources that you're putting out there, and just your musings. I hope you're publishing all of these somewhere. So, share with listeners where they should go from here.
Well, thank you for already plugging my website. So www.mediahumanity.com is the URL. Also, just Media Humanity is my LinkedIn page. At Media Humanity is my Instagram and my Facebook. My personal handles on social and Instagram specifically is at Curiously Kristen. Yeah, so I share a lot more personal stuff on that. I'm pretty open on that side of things, because I try to practice what I preach. But yeah, reach out if you're kind of interested in even business coaching. I feel like I do have a lot of musings. I do have a lot of unsolicited advice that I just love to put into the universe. Or if you actually need a site designed, if you need help with branding, brand identity, those are things that I would love to help with. Refreshed copy across your digital assets, plenty of things that we can talk about. And I think that no two projects are the same. The same way that, Brian, you do not ask the same questions to every guest. You kind of see where the conversation takes you and you build off of it as it goes. It's the same thing with helping somebody with their website, their branding, their digital experience, because everybody has a different starting point. So understanding where they are and where they're trying to go helps you basically show that progress. If you don't know your initial metrics, your initial goals, then you don't know how much progress you've made. And every piece of progress counts. And again, to the self-minimization point, it's, the big goals are all just the aggregate of small gains over time. So be patient with yourself. I would say be impatient with action, but be patient with results.
Heck yeah, incredible advice all the way up until the end. And Kristen, that is one of the most appropriate Instagram handles I've ever heard. Curiously Kristen. I absolutely love that. So to all of you listeners who are listening to this on the go, of course, check the show notes. You'll get a link to mediahumanity.com down there, as well as the social media handles that Kristen shared for her business and herself. Otherwise, Kristen, thank you so much for coming on the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really loved it. It was so fun.